Hello everyone. Welcome to the stream. It's been a while, so welcome everybody. This is a little bit of a mix between Crafting Tech Teams, the new newsletter, and the Technologies podcast. So that's why we're here. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, that's where you're watching us. Otherwise, on LinkedIn, this is on my personal page. This Q&A today is happening primarily because I started a 6-day challenge last week, which finished yesterday. And this challenge was all about data engineering. Data engineering meets software engineering, specifically in domains where domain-driven design and event modeling apply. So we are talking about the context of modern applications, perhaps on the web or perhaps a little bit more complex domain. There are always exceptions. The inspiration for this was primarily the book Designing Data-Intensive Applications. It has been recommended to me since, I don't know, for the past few years, and I've been laying off reading it. So I decided to read it, and while I was reading it, I got a lot of ideas about what to write about. So I figured I might as well make it about. I might as well take you all on the journey with me while I'm reading the book. And I like to speed read, so I was taking notes and I was speed reading, and I was sort of reading it in the context of if I had to explain the book to somebody, how would I read it? So I figured, okay, well, that's a really good match for having a Q&A afterwards, or just sharing about it on my newsletter, or just talking about it in general. The added twist. So we're talking about the book Data Designing Data-Intensive Applications by Martin Kleppmann. This is a book published in 2017. I don't have the physical one with me right now, as I was reading from an ebook. So the inspiration in the context of crafting tech teams was specifically something I observed recently in tech teams that have a sort of very strong engineering and product cycle, let's say. But data analysts and data scientists and perhaps even machine learning experts, not in this context, but I've seen this sort of be separated this way, are usually compartmentalized separate from software engineering. And I've been hearing a lot of feedback from data engineers who are following me on LinkedIn or are Crafting Tech Team subscribers, that there's a huge disconnect in software engineering quality in craftsmanship practices on the data engineering side. Specifically, things like automated testing, continuous delivery. There's a lot of discovery going on. There's a lot of handcrafting. There's a lot of experimentation, but not a lot of what we would call engineering. From the context of leadership, what this comes down to is, I was wondering if I was a tech lead, perhaps a VPE who is pulling together those three departments, product engineering and data science, what challenges will I be facing that are unique to that role? Is that architecture? Is that more a domain-driven design problem? Is that more Conway's law? So I figured, okay, if we are going to talk about it in this manner, we might as well do it with the, let's say, most recent development, which would be team topologies, event modeling, domain-driven design with event storming, and then rely on something very fundamental. So I figured I'll pick up the book. So that's where this to me, it organically seemed to mesh together very well, especially chapters 8 onwards of the book. Chapter 10 specifically talks about things like data streaming and event event sourcing, 10 and 11 and 12. So I made that the focus of the newsletters for the most part, but you'll get a lot of value from the historic sort of significance of the book going through the evolution of SQL, NoSQL, all the various forms of scalability, partitioning, replication, what transactions are for, and consensus in large systems. But primarily, what I focused on with the 6-day challenge were the chapters dealing with derived data. So when is having copies of data appropriate? And we saw a lot of this in the most recent studies about cloud-based systems, where we will have, everybody wants to have copies as close to the user as possible, especially in web applications. So there is a natural edge focus going on in modern applications that do not even have a center anymore, so that the data never comes back to a transactional database. So there is no master database. It's just all running on edges, and then it's just being aggregated into a data lake or data warehouse. This is quite common with modern setups that are running parallel DynamoDB setups or Kafka setups. So I wanted to talk more about what tools you can use, you and your team specifically, if you're new to event modeling, if you're new to event sourcing, if you're new even to the book itself, because it's only been out for a few years, what you can learn from it and how you can apply it. Crafting tech teams primarily is not so much about theory. It's about what I see working in hands-on, working with teams, and what they apply and why they don't apply it. I really like focusing on this idea of you're all very smart, benevolent people, but there's something very human that stops you from applying what you already know. Imposter syndrome, limiting beliefs, any kind of emotional pitfalls that prevent you from really reaching out towards your full potential and really applying it at work or in your business, perhaps in your hobby, if that's your hobby. And specifically when you feel like that pressure of I can't apply my potential is being externalized subconsciously towards a bad relationship with somebody who holds a lot of authority in the workspace. Maybe that's your boss, maybe that's the most senior person in the room. That's what I like to focus on. It's like, why do those things happen? How do we fix them? How do we destroy limiting beliefs? I do have a coaching cohort coming up on that in November, so it's going to be the first time running this in this format, so I'm really excited about that. But I do want to talk more about these topics in the context of technology specifically, because there's a lot of technology to be exploring, but let's face it, you'll never get that greenfield project that you're waiting for, and your business probably doesn't need you sort of playing around with new tech, but your business does require that you understand the tools you're using, so there's a immediate discrepancy there. But this is a Q&A. We will get to this naturally. If you're in chat, leave a comment, leave your questions. I do have some questions prepared. Any kind of live participants will take priority. With your permission, I will show you on the little doodly-doo if that's okay with you, if you type live in chat. And while we wait for the room to sort of speak up, I will go through my prepared questions. One of the questions was specifically it was just general career advice for the most part. The question was, the person who has the question has 5 to 6 years experience in tech. They feel like an imposter. they don't feel like leadership is for them, like they don't want to become a manager, but they don't really see what they can do to improve their career. They're working in a startup. They don't have a career trajectory, and they feel stuck. And the industry is incentivizing. This isn't the end of the question, but from my perspective, the industry is also incentivizing them, especially if they live in the U.S., to job hop to increase their salaries. But if you really like where you are working, then that's a really double-edged sword, because the industry is incentivizing you to job hop to increase your salary, but that means that you need to leave a job that you really enjoy working at, and that can be really tough to navigate that. So to address the question of career trajectory first, I like to make things personalized, perhaps not personal to the degree that, hey, it's your fault, like get your stuff together, but it's focus on what you can control. If there's a job opportunity, an opportunity, not for you, but just in general, an opportunity where you work, if that is not communicated to you, then ask. Don't assume, don't try for something to happen, just ask. It's like, hey, I want to improve. Is there anywhere that I can go? Sideways, up? Can I change themes? Can I make it, like, how can you make this more fun for me? And usually the most common thing that I see teams lacking in this context is that you, the engineer, are not having regular one-on-ones with your manager. That would be step one for my advice. It's like, before you start considering anything career impactful, anything invasive, set up a communication channel with your manager. Ask to have regular one-on-ones, maybe once per month. If you're struggling, maybe every 2 weeks. And if it's really bad, then every week, or just have a little outlet, maybe even create a little Slack channel where you can vent, or where you can talk about your frustrations or talk about your intentions. Because if you're leaving, if you're really pissed off and you're leaving, or you're just dejected and you have no motivation to work and you just go to work and do nothing, then that needs to be addressed. You shouldn't be waiting for that meeting in 2 weeks. So step one, absolutely set up a communication channel. There should always be a one-on-one, private, profound space for you to be human with the other human who has the most impact on your career at your company. Always. And that's your responsibility to set up. If you don't have that, ask. If they don't want to, cool. That's another problem. If they say no, I don't think they'll say no. But if they do say no, then ask to have one-on-ones with their manager. That's called a skip level. It's like a skip level meeting, like a skip level one-on-one. Just talk to your manager's manager. Maybe your manager is not experienced enough to know that this is important, and they're actually being trained without your knowledge to be a manager, to be a leader, and you were not aware of this. So if you talk to your manager's manager, but you need to be careful to talk to the right person, and that you're not doing this to undermine them. Slide me a DM if you want a template on what these emails would look like. There's a very friendly, benign way of asking to have skip levels with your manager's manager, or with your leader's leader, or with your boss's boss. So absolutely, communication channels sort of upwards the vertical with the person, and to be clear, not with HR. HR is there to deal with legal problems. We are talking with people who understand what it is you're doing, not how it is you're legally obliged to be paid, and sort of what services you're providing. So you want to talk to the human side who sees you working, whether that's remotely or whether that's in office, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. Somebody is watching out for you, at least checking that you made it to the office, whether that's a physical or digital one. It has to be that person. It has to be person that cares if you're absent. The second part of that question is, so if you're feeling stuck, so what to focus on as a sort of 5 year of experience senior. Well, you have a lot of options, really. Like when I started my career, there weren't a lot of, let's say, titles. We sort of had senior engineer, and then it sort of stopped, and then the staff engineers started emerging, and then we had the engineering management, because before it was just project manager. Then it sort of started stratifying apart horizontally. So we have VP of engineering now, VP of product, VP of engineering and product, engineering managers, technical program managers, technical project managers. So, well, how I like to describe it is there's this level where you're essentially on the triangle of engineering, product, and business, and you need to decide where you want to be. Are you a strong engineering person? Okay, learn about the business or learn about the product and be the go-to guy. Usually the most fun stuff happens at the overlap of these departments. It's also coincidentally where most of my coaching applies. When teams hire me, I position myself just outside the team. So I'm with the team, with the manager or with the manager's manager, or with the team and sort of looking over the product or looking over to data engineering, or perhaps both. Or maybe this is a startup and the person I'm talking to is actually on several levels, on several roles, because it's usually wear many hats in startups. It's a little bit more chaotic. It's a little less structured. There's less second line and third line managers. Where was I going with this? Chat? Yes. So there's a lot of specialization going on. So pick the part where you're strongest. And to be clear, the thing you're passionate about, the thing you're enthusiastic about, the thing you stay up at night watching YouTube videos about, that really nerdy stuff that you enjoy just watching and consuming content about, that's the thing you're passionate about. And the thing you're passionate about, if you make it your vocation, you'll be good at it. I'm not saying you can't be good at it if it's not your passion, but if you want to be good at it as your vocation, it's a lot easier if you're passionate about it. Because if you're not passionate about that, then you have to be more passionate about something else, for which, for example, you're taking care of your family, to which then this vocation needs to be of service to, or sort of providing. So it can become a little bit complicated if your priorities, if your value structure is a little bit disorganized, or if you're not certain, if you're not perfectly clear about the hierarchy of your values. So find the thing that you're most passionate about. Even if it doesn't highlight in your CV, it's okay to detach from your CV and say, well, yeah, that's on my CV, but when I was in that role, most of what I was doing is this. When I was in that role, what I was really passionate about was this. Try to separate out what you have documented and what other people have documented from how you actually felt in the job. What helped me a lot is reaching out to former colleagues, especially those that sort of either ignited or noticed a spark in Dennis, so that, hey, Dennis, that like when we did that, like everybody's eyes were sparkling, and when we did that was really fun. I miss those times. Those people you should probably talk to and ask them for feedback about what it was exactly that they enjoyed, was in the room, but what was it that you brought to the room? Because generally career is really simple. Any kind of work related, let's say business related progress is following a very simple formula. If you're pitching because you want to validate yourself, you'll have to sort of piss against the wind. because nobody's interested in that. So you have to be the loudest, and you have to be the most successful one. But if you want to do it easily, benevolently, sort of flow with the river, uh, you need three elements. One is determining what somebody's pain point is. That somebody can be an engineering manager, that somebody can be a CEO, that somebody can be a tech lead, that somebody can be a senior engineer who needs a coworker, that somebody can be an architect who needs another project manager. But it's usually not the recruiter. Figure out what their pain point is, then ask them what their goals are. You need to define what success looks like, and then where you come in is you add value along that path. You get them from pain to their goals and aspirations. That's the simplest formula. And you start by adding value. And you can't add any value unless you understand what exactly is valuable to them. So for example, if you might have a lot of difficult conversations with your product manager who's constantly shutting down your attempts to apply event sourcing or to apply test-driven development or to apply event modeling or any kind of heavy process, rather than fighting them on it, trying to convince them that you're right, because really this is your decision, but you might not feel like you have the authority to make this decision. What you can do is ask them what the pain points are. You're always late, quality is really bad, etc., etc., etc. You need to be heavily managed. They might say something like this. The engineers need to be managed heavily because otherwise it's chaos, or whatever deadline we give them, they spend everything and then some. But you need to go beyond this. Like, the pain is not enough. Like, you need to know what success looks like. And this is naturally what Agile is all about. Like, we need to understand what the goals and aspirations of the business are and what the goals and aspirations of our customers are. Because really, for example, Instagram is not a good app because it gives Mark Zuckerberg superpowers. Mark Zuckerberg bought Instagram because it gives Instagram users superpowers. It made your really lousy, ugly pictures look beautiful with a few simple filters, and then created a whole movement about square images and sharing it on the internet. When low quality images, when high quality images were simply too invasive for any kind of network carrier to be even considered to have a large gallery on the mobile phone. The point was that the users were added value by them essentially dealing with a pain point where you take pictures of your family and then you put them in a photo album, but now you can't show it to anybody. So you only look at the pictures in your photo album when people come to visit. And that started the whole sort of Polaroid movement one more time in the digital era. And that, we invented selfies essentially. But that was going from pain point to golden aspirations. Like, people were able to sort of have public photo albums. People were publicly enabled to have the superpower of sharing their emotions, their memories with the public, and even make it prettier than it actually is, which is a little bit of a downside that came with it, but it's still valuable. Instagram, what Instagram did was they figured out what exactly in the process was valuable, and then they stopped doing everything else. It was just upload it, pick a filter, boom, done. And then they really optimize just doing that. So if you're struggling with that in your career, my advice would definitely be try to position yourself in a place where you can have a conversation about the pain, but also to be talking to somebody of authority so that they can tell you what success looks like. Because what you don't want to be doing is you don't want to be stuck in a job where everybody says, yeah, we're always late, it always sucks, there's always bugs, there's always something goes wrong, but that's just how it is. When you ask the question, okay, well, how do you want it to be? Like, in an ideal world, like, how do you want it to be? Well, on time, super cheap, super fast, and with no unexpected outages on deploy day. That can be done. That has to be planned. That has to be managed. And the conversation has to be set. Some goals and expectations have to be set so that then you can have a conversation about, okay, well, do we care more about quality, or do we care more about being on time? Do we care more about being cheap, or do we care more about having a heavy process? Do we care more about our ability to crank out 40,000 features in parallel, or do we want to optimize the feedback loop of understanding what the users really want, what's useful to them? Yeah, and that's sort of that systematized, commoditized waterfall thinking versus agile, like lowercase agile, not the certifications, not Scrum. Um, Specifically in the context of lean and extreme programming, we are there's all what I see a lot, and this is in relevance to the question, is the idea of you need to understand, well, not that you need to, but that you always have to deal with overconfidence. Overconfidence in yourself, overconfidence in your team, overconfidence in your product manager. Because oftentimes what happens is you ask somebody, well, what happens if it's not useful? What happens if we launch this and nobody uses it? And they might say, oh, that won't happen. That level of overconfidence. Because it prevents you from asking the next question, which is, well, do we want to make sure? Well, if that was to happen, would you still want to invest in the entire feature? If it takes like $50,000 to produce, and that was the outcome, would you want to invest $50,000 to figure that out? And they say, well, no, of course not. We would just test it early and then not invest. That's what a benevolent leader would do. And usually those conversations are really tough because you need to push through that. Your opinion, sort of set aside your opinion and your relationship with the person and really just focus on, like, well, what do they want? Maybe they just want to get promoted and they really need to push this feature out. But then that's setting you up to fail, because you might be sort of headed down a road where the product will be bad no matter what, because nobody's asking questions. Nobody's questioning the questions. Nobody's questioning requirements. And most projects really fail in the requirements gathering phase, not in the implementation. Most difficult things that engineers have to deal with are non-functional. Communication, understanding the system, setting requirements, really getting down to the nitty-gritty detail. So it's tough, but it's possible. It's possible to do. You might have the voice in your head that says that, hey, no, this is not for me. I'm like this. I will never be able to talk with people or to have this kind of conversation. This can be learned. This is a skill like any other, and with sufficient practice, you'll be good at it. But you need to have an inspiration beyond just wanting to be good at the skill. You need to understand what's important to you, and that's why I brought in this idea of life coaching into my coaching practice. Of, well, I can't really help you if you have ulterior motives, where you're so focused on that other thing that happened that you don't want to mess up, that you're sort of undermining the team's ability to succeed. To be able to find those little things that happen in day-to-day conversation and sort of weasel them out and have them worked on, to sort of help whatever team I'm coaching, to help them hold themselves accountable to growth, to being agile, to delivering, to not perfect quality, but just deciding what the quality should be and then sticking to that decision and then evaluating whether that's still the right decision. Usually teams just go balls to the walls, like zero quality or full quality, and then it's just mandated 100% test coverage, or just no testing, no nothing, just as fast as possible, please. Just fast as possible. Just everybody's running. The analogy that I like to use is, when you're in a restaurant and there's a rush, and all the tables, the entire restaurant is full, and all the tables are empty, and you're in a hurry to get served. The last thing that you want is your waiter to be running with your food. Like that's the equivalent of Scrum and Agile wanting to optimize velocity beyond all else. That brings us to the next question. The next question had more to do with event sourcing, and it also, I believe this is a follow-up question from one of Adam Dimitruk's event modeling episodes on just event modeling in general. They have a meetup, I think on Friday morning if you're in Europe. It's an AMA, it's an event modeling AMA. And the question was asked on YouTube, and it was essentially, when it comes to event modeling as a process, because we see that I saw a lot of overlap with it as well from the book, especially when it comes to planning a schema, planning the flow of data and the relationship of data with what Kent Beck likes to call bitemporality, where you not only have a state of the data now, and an entity in the database might have relationships, but it might have hard constraints and hard foreign keys, for example, and you have a historic record of that data as well. So you need to know in what state it was back when it was active. This is very relevant, for example, not so much for e-commerce for invoicing, but very much for subscriptions, because you might have a subscription, you might change the subscription, then you need to know what did the subscription look like, what was the plan back then when somebody was doing some kind of payment plan for a subscription or for some big one-time purchase that then got converted into a subscription, and then we change the subscription. So that it got modified, and where's the data break, when does the data change, when does one entity become two. So those aspects of bitemporality, of like there having been a sort of locality event on the timeline that has to be accustomed to if you're replaying or just looking back and just doing analytics. That's a really complex issue. The question was really, isn't event modeling just a bunch of complex planning? It's a really good question, because whenever I introduce event modeling, it's just this really, people scratching their heads, and it's a lot of work, and we just, like, the Miro boards get enormous. And the more you document, the more time you need to invest to keep that documentation up to date, especially if it's not your main source of documentation. And the way I answered was essentially, well, yes, it is. It is complex. Same way with event storming with domain-driven design. They even tell you, that just if your domain is trivial and you don't need domain models, if it's just transaction scripts, if you're following Martin Fowler's book, Patterns of Enterprise Application Architecture, if you're just doing CRUD, like a transaction script, and where you just add stuff, begin transaction, commit, done, and there's no side effects, there's no complex logic, there's no bitemporality, there's no out of bounds, out of transaction, sort of bidirectional like sagas or something equivalent, then you don't need this. Then absolutely don't use it. It's just too much documentation, needless documentation. The issue is when it is complex, and most systems are complex on their seams where different contexts overlap when they touch. So that might be not in accounting, not in e-commerce, but where your e-commerce system touches accounting, right? So it's that overlap that is the most complex. When you're learning event modeling, the same way as with anything, when you're refactoring your process, well, not really refactoring, but you're actually changing your process, it will get worse before it gets better. So any kind of attempt to change something will make it worse for a little bit. And then if it turns out to be bad change, you will go back because it actually stayed worse. And if it it's an improvement, then it will get better than it was originally. But you need to have enough context and enough cognitive um, sort of memory. Essentially, the team needs to have enough memory. The organization needs to have enough memory to know, okay, this is what it was before we made the change. This was the transition period, and now it's better. That's a successful digital transformation. What event modeling allows is, yes, it's complex, but it replaces a lot of other complex processes. Specifically, it replaces this idea of having Jira tick. Sorry, that was aggressive. It replaces this idea of needing Jira tickets, and then the Jira tickets have Google Docs about deck specs, and then there's a Google Doc with another Google Doc, and then it links back to a architecture decision record in GitHub, and then you have this sort of weird loop where you have code that has Jira links, and then the Jira links have documents, and the documents have Google Docs. It's just a whole mess. What event modeling allows you to do is it allows you to formalize the planning of the project and the architectural documentation to, I would say, two sources, which is your code base and the event model. And then you're essentially using the event model as you would use a sprint. Because when the event model is all connected, you can have documentation about, okay, who's working on this, who's working on that. Is this connected now? Because your entire data flow, your entire application usually lives around the data flow. So if you visualize your data flow, then you can visualize how much of the data flow you've implemented. And usually when you implement the important parts of the data flow, you have finished the project. And that's a very good replacement for Jira or any kind of other Kanban system, or even Agile system or Scrum system. And then you do the little fixes out of bounds, or you assign full continuous delivery ownership to a team, to a vertical team, or to a platform team, and then they self-manage from that point onward. So if there's any bug fixes to be done or any kind of infrastructure work to be done, that then gets self-managed, and it doesn't have to be reverse engineered back into the event model because it has something to do with the data flow anymore. It doesn't have to do with the important data processes that the business cares about. It's just dealing with the infrastructure of how the system is running, and nobody really cares about how that is managed as long as it is managed in some manner. What surprised me is that going in, I thought it was just event modeling, that event modeling was just a replacement for speccing out event-driven architectures, specifically because it looked very similar to event storming and sort of event storming meets C4. But I realized that what it does when you get the full picture, the full slice, the diagram, the event timeline, the storyboard, the UIs, because you have the very top of the event model has little images of the user experience, of wireframes, of buttons. You actually see the entire application with the wireframes, with the data flow, with the side effects of the data flow, which is usually that invisible backend stuff, and how they manifest. So you get to see subcatenaously, so just the layered subcatenaous, usually is a term often used in event modeling. You get to see the layer just beneath the user interface, but how the side effects of the data flow bubble up to the surface. And then that allows you to really slice that vertical of, okay, this is where the data goes up towards the UI, that we're going to test, and this we're going to test, and that when the data goes down back below the surface and comes up above the surface, and then it lends itself really well to architectural practices like clean architecture, hexagonal architecture, vertical slice architecture. And what I coach a lot with the teams that I work with is, once you have the event model, you don't have to do it from the left side. It's a timeline, and you'd be foolish to follow it left to right. Because what you can do is, once you know what the UI looks like, you can fake the data to a relatively simple degree and work backwards. So you start at the screen that the user wants, and then you work backwards from that, and you start with the actual things that are with the upwards channels of going into the UI, which are the projections. You fake those, and once all of those are faked, then you can prioritize, well, okay, which ones are we now hooking up to a more alive system? Maybe it was just local on the server, but now we actually needed enterprise grade, maybe we needed space grade, maybe it was good enough, but now we need to follow all these security guidelines before the main launch. So doing that from a place where it's actually already working, but then you're just adding detailed nuance to it to make it security compliant and to follow any regulatory compliances. And don't get me wrong, there are some regulatory procedures, especially in fintech, that require you to just architect your system completely differently. This is not a silver bullet. Like, if you need to do that, then you still need to do that. But it doesn't have to be a showstopper. It doesn't have to be, okay, big design up front. We need to do this, plan for 2 months, and then no feedback. And then you just battle through. We'll be late anyway. Let's just start from the left, and then we'll see how far we get by the deadline. That's where most teams fail, because they're just so overwhelmed at the beginning of the project, they just give up. They just give up wanting to even finish early, never mind on the deadline. So event modeling is a project management tool. And if it's your first time doing event sourcing, if you have any doubts about whether to do it or not to do it, or whether to even apply it in your repertoire, because maybe you're not coming from an event sourced system, and going towards an event sourced system might be a little bit difficult. The question I get asked a lot is, is this better than what we have? And if you check out the articles from day 3, 4, and 5, you'll notice that, like, even if you don't want to use an event source system, you probably are. You're using an event source system by default, and then you're throwing data away. Right? So all systems that are essentially more than a sheet of paper are event sourced. Even a sheet of paper is event sourced, because usually you write top to bottom on the piece of paper, or right to left, or however it is how you write on a sheet of paper where you're from. But you very rarely write on a sheet of paper and then you perfectly erase what you've written, and then you write again in that row. That's how SQL databases work. It's like, well, if I have to, I will delete that row and then put something else in that slot. That's not how that's not how a normal human, a business person, thinks about data. Even when you have a chalkboard, you need to wipe the chalkboard clean, and then you need to add something to it. And usually you just wipe off like one bit from the chalkboard. We like having books and records and logs. An SQL database is essentially just a chalkboard. And I find it unreasonable for any kind of serious business that has very valuable data to be relying on a chalkboard for all of their data needs, and then relying on this idea of this is how big the chalkboard is, and then when we run out of data, we'll just keep adding chalkboards, and then if we run out of space, we'll just keep deleting old records that we don't need. Don't get me wrong, you can still do this with an event source system. It's just that in an event source system, there's another log that represents what the data we have, and then based on that log, we decide what goes on the board. And the board in that case is a projection, but it's not the canonical representation. If the board gets wiped out because of rain, we can still just look up the log and check what needs to be there. And that's the sort of mental gymnastics required to really get in to event sourcing if you're not used to it. And that was the third question that I was sort of naturally segueing into. If you have never done event sourcing and you would like to do it with your team, do it on a pilot project. Definitely don't do it against the grain by you wanting to do it and then you the tech lead wanting to do it and the team is against it, or you're the most senior person in the team, you want to do it but the tech lead is against it. Like, just get buy-in. Just run an experiment, have clear outcomes of why you want to do it. And if you don't know what the benefits of event sourcing are, there are a lot of case studies on the Event Store DB website. You don't need to use Event Store DB, but they have a lot of brilliant case studies on it. Or if you're following Oscar, I just want to get his name right. Oscar Dudic, I believe it's pronounced Duditz. He's one of the Martin maintainers, and if you follow him, you'll also find a lot of interesting topics about why event sourcing is useful, and in what context it is useful, and in what context it isn't. But I have not seen, 99% of the use cases that I see, event sourcing is useful. It's only not useful in a team that is scared of applying it. But any team that I saw adopt event sourcing, that's where they stayed. Because it is a much more natural way of thinking about data. It's like data comes in here, I store it, and then I transform it, and I put it somewhere else. That is also the idea between the event sourcing is actually the but it's not durable. But event sourcing is the idea of the what do you call it? The fissure between Angular 1 and React when it first came out. It was like, how are we doing? Are we doing event based? Are we doing Redux, the stores? Event sourcing is essentially having a durable Redux database where all the data flows in one direction, and the canonical store is the log of all model updates from the store. Now, Redux models usually don't keep an event log in the store. They usually just keep the derivative. But it's that idea of data flowing in one direction, and that you're avoiding sorted split merge joins at query time, which is, if you read the book, the whole idea behind NoSQL databases is that the data you need is structured in a way that's focused on a user interface that you would need for any kind of trivial information. You would need to do joins, and that means that the data is not in a form that is very appropriate for user interface rendering. Instead, it's in a form that is appropriate for data consistency. And when the data you're dealing with is mostly just garbage from the user, and then 1% has to be consistent, that's a huge opportunity left on the table to use a NoSQL database like DynamoDB or even Redis or Mongo. And even a step further, if you're starting off with event sourcing, you could then, after the fact, decide, okay, well, now our 1% important data has expanded and now split, and now there's 3. There's billing, there's accounting, and then there's the 2-vector marketplace that are really important. Everything else we just want cached as aggressively as possible. And then the really tough questions are coming from that analytics database in the warehouse. Startups are notorious for abusing the system, just having one central database, an SQL-based chalkboard, and they're adding history tables and log tables to the SQL database that has sort of snapshots of rows that have been deleted or moved, or they have historic records of it. That's just essentially having event sourcing, but done very badly with none of the benefits. And it's a lot slower, and then it incentivizes data analysts, business analysts, data scientists to use your transactional database that is sort of doing many things at the same time, also as a data warehouse. And that's just, that's too many chefs in the kitchen. That's too many people wanting to have oversight and sort of veto control about how the data should be structured so it can be queried efficiently. And at a certain point, analytics queries will crash the hot part of the application. So you might, there's already a natural tendency to having transactional and analytical data projected separately. Not to say that it's meant to be CQRS, but it's meant to serve different interests. And it's much, I found at least, that it's much easier to project an analytics database out of an event store than it is to essentially follow a natural event sourced, um, biologically event sourced system. Just throw the data away, just keep the final snapshot in the SQL database, and then try to reverse engineer historical records, historical facts from that by taking delta snapshots and backups in the data warehouse and then using it that way. Usually that ends up being exactly the same level of complexity as using event sourcing, but you don't have the tool, you're not doing it deliberately, you probably didn't event model it, you don't have a diagram that covers all the flows, you don't have a diagram that covers all the changes of the data breaks of how the schema evolved over time. And then it just becomes a too hard problem, and then somebody wants to buy some big enterprise level software for 20K per month and hope that it'll solve all problems. And throw sprinkle some chat GPT onto it, and maybe it'll solve all your problems, but you and I both know it won't. So to recap, question one was about career transitioning, being stuck in your career, getting some kind of improvement from your job, or if you're looking for a new job, definitely figure out how to contribute more value. Figure out the pain point of a company, what their goals are. Especially if you go on interviews, ask them, what does success look like? As an engineer, you should always be asking the question, what does success look like? And you want to be sure that if the person you're talking to doesn't understand this, talk about something that they have an understanding of success for. Because maybe you're just talking to the recruiter, and the recruiter wants to make sure that they hire somebody that the company will decide, yes, this was a success, that it's a good fit. Okay, help them be successful in that. Help them make sure that if they hire you, that it's a good fit. So if it's not a good fit, help them determine what would make it a bad fit. Really, really do your utmost to provide value to them to make sure, it's a bad fit if this and this were the case. Is it the case? Okay, no, yes. Then ask questions about the company. If you're already in a company, set up a one-on-one channel with your manager. If you can't, for whatever reason, set up a skip level. Make sure to do it candidly, to make it in a way that doesn't undermine their power, that doesn't undermine their authority, that doesn't make them feel threatened. Specialization-wise, you don't have to go into management from a senior engineer. You can become an architect, you become a trainer, you can become a coach, you can become a consultant, you can freelance, you can become a principal engineer, staff engineer, you can focus on company-wide engineering problems, you can focus more into systems, you can focus more into platforms, maybe on a specific tech stack, hardware, delivery. Delivery is very popular right now. People even have delivery managers. Maybe you want to be in DevOps, or site reliability engineering, or nowadays what's really popular is DevSecOps. So there's also this whole element of securing the data pipeline as well, of like the delivery process also might have security concerns during the building of the project. Number two, regarding event modeling, is it complex? Yes, it's complex, but also it simplifies. It encourages you to not really waste time with a lot of other even more complex tools. Because it's 2023. I don't understand why Jira is necessary. Jira was the answer to Trac, TRAC, and Bugzilla. Do you remember Bugzilla? Are you old enough? Are you old enough to remember Bugzilla? where you basically had tickets in a table and they were red, yellow, or green for priority, and you sort of had to figure out where what goes. And once the list no longer fit on your screen, you had a huge mess on your hands. So Jira was sort of meant as a way to compartmentalize that and search that and make it user friendly, and maybe even have some automated workflows, because that was a mess, Bugzilla and Track. But really, you're not running a software shop to be constantly fixing 40,000 bugs in your system. You're doing it probably because you're crafting something new for every ticket that comes in. And if tickets convey less information than what you produce by just working on the system, and then you don't put it back into Jira, because you probably put it back into GitHub, or you put it back into Bitbucket, or you put it back into the actual code and you document it there, then there's already this split brain effect of the code carries more information about the system than the actual tickets that created it. And the tickets are there as a perishable resource, that if the ticket isn't worked on fast enough, it will just decay and get forgotten and abandoned. And if the ticket is worked on, it'll become stale. So in order for you to rely on documentation, I don't see why Jira would be useful. Not to say that you shouldn't be using Jira. It's just that if you're in software and you're building a system that isn't commoditized, that isn't just purely support and maintenance and bug tracking and just changing stuff in the database, or just support related, then you'll be better served by using a system that is much closer to your code and much closer to your actual technical understanding of the project, while also adopting business terminology. And for those tools, diagramming, event storming, or event modeling on a Miro board is much more practical, especially if you use one of the newer ones. Now there's the event modeling movement is creating a whole range of specific event modeling tools that allow you to code generate certain stop classes and mocks. So I have high hopes for that, but still the ergonomics of Miro are still way up and beyond anything else in the industry. Other than the seat management and the user accounts, like I hate that. I'm sorry, Miro, but I really hate how the amount of users are being scaled when I share a Miro board to somebody, and I have to add them to my team, and I don't know what they have permission and they have access to. That I'm not a fan of that. But hey, it's a good tool. It's a great tool. And then question number 2 was, if you come into the domain of event sourcing, should you be using it? Should you be not using it? My recommendation is get buy-in. Like, learn enough about event sourcing, maybe by reading a newsletter, to be able to explain it to somebody to the degree that you can inspire them to try it. And then keep pushing on that until you got a few engineers and the leader, or the most senior person, or a combination of those, excited enough so their eyes sparkle, and then use that on a really critical project as a pilot. Don't do it on something boring, because you won't learn anything. Use it on a critical project when everybody has buy-in. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't make it safe. Don't make it like trivial. It has to be on a critical subsystem. Otherwise, you won't take it seriously. Obviously, don't delete all your data and your mainframe and expose all your data publicly. Like, that would be negligence. But learn enough about the craft to actually take it seriously. Maybe hire a coach. Maybe go do a workshop on it. Maybe do a little figure out what event sourcing you're already doing without knowing it. See how that works and how you can use it to your benefit. If you're doing any kind of CDC, if you're using an SQL database and it has write-ahead logs turned on and replication is turned on, that's already an element of event capture, but not sourcing, because the source is still that other database, not the binary log that gets pruned. There's an article on that in the challenge series on crafting tech teams. But definitely Don't be afraid to use it. Most systems in our industry can benefit. Most can benefit from event sourcing with no ridiculous effort. Like, you can just go to event sourcing and reap benefits very quickly. It requires a mental shift, but I have yet to see a system that doesn't lend itself well. I have yet to see a realistic, real life business system that doesn't lend itself to event sourcing, or that doesn't naturally end up having event sourced properties, like having logs or auditability or historic records or snapshots of some kind or tombstone records, or just having multiple projections of the same data. I have yet to see a system of a business that is successful that doesn't naturally go that direction. And if you decided to adopt a data strategy that throws data away, I got news for you. Somebody at some point will want to get that data back and then stop throwing it away and then retain as much as possible going forward. Okay, so that's our first Q&A. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for sending them in, so I had something to talk about in case nobody came up and asked questions in chat. I'm happy to answer your questions in LinkedIn or on YouTube. Feel free to comment. Subscribe to Crafting Tech Teams if you want to stay up to date and join next time. And we'll be doing more of these book challenges in the future. Right now I'm reading Implementing Lean Software Developments. I believe this is book number 2, but this one was a bit more pragmatic for my taste. And I see a lot of overlap with what I called tactical agility and modern software development, especially with the combination of Dora and Space Metrics. Now also adding the human side to lean and extreme programming, which I really like. This is going to be big. I have a good gut feeling on this. Okay, so thank you. Yeah, Crafting Tech Teams. The newsletter is staying free for a while longer. I'm really enjoying writing content there. I would love more interaction. So I'm very DM friendly. So if you have any questions or any concerns, send me a DM on LinkedIn or reply. You can reply to the email that you get every day from Crafting Tech Teams. I do read them and I do reply to them. And there was one person who the first person figured out that they weren't working at some point, so that has been fixed. So we did test that. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking the time to watch this if you're watching the recording. Thank you for joining live, and thank you for sending out all those questions. So this has been a great journey. Crafting Tech Teams is really picking up. The Technologies podcast will have a guest soon, I promise. We'll be doing a lot more team leadership and tech leadership and destroying limited beliefs topics on the more face-to-face conversations. And yeah, have a good day, have a good evening, have a good morning, wherever you are, and see you next time.